One. No. Everything. All this. It was your fault. If that's what you believe, then shoot me. 2.
I didn't mean to hurt anybody.
No one ever does, Walker. 3. 4. Is this really what you want, Walker? So be it. 5.
Spec Ops: The Line is a personal game if ever there was one, so to review it properly I need to start with myself. I'm one of those games or art types, the kind of games I like innovate or have innovated in the past, either with story or gameplay. Some of my favorite games include Walking Dead, Journey, and Max Payne, and my goal has always been to seek out new and exciting games to play. The only way to lure me to a new game is with the promise that it has something I haven't seen before, and since I've already played Call of Duty Black Ops, I figured that I would never have to play another military shooter again, seeing as how the entire genre is based around the same game being reskinned and re-released over and over again. So it goes without saying that when Spec Ops released promising a mediocre reimagining of a shitty game franchise from the past into a generic modern shooter with shoddy controls, I didn't give it the time of day. It seems that the entire world was like-minded, considering the Spec Ops line sold about half a dozen copies and exited public memory in less time than a medium-length piss. What prevented the game from being wiped from existence by time itself, and what drew me to it after so long, were the people who actually did play it. Extra Credits and Zero Punctuation, 2 gaming shows that I very much trust, began to voice their opinions on the game, which I will now quote in no particular order. Holy hell, I did not see this game coming. Turns those expectations on their head to make a point. Engaging as all hell. Based on Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Greenlighting this took balls. A game story that really got to me, giving me genuine feelings of weariness, guilt, and actual physical sickness. The most exciting thing to happen in video game narrative for years. One for the history books. Spec Ops: The Line also won Zero Punctuation's Best Game of 2012 award. And all this painted a very clear picture, and the picture was of a game that looked, sounded, felt, and even tasted like a Modern Warfare knockoff, when in reality it was a satire of the modern shooter tropes and an insult to gamers at large. And with cred like that dangling in front of me, I couldn't help myself. I dedicated a 3-day weekend to a Heart of Darkness marathon, in which I read the entire book, Heart of Darkness, and watched Apocalypse Now, which is based on said book. And lastly, I played through Spec Ops: The Line. Heart of Darkness is an exploration of darkness, through a man named Marlowe's trip down a river in the partially colonized African wilderness, in search of a mysterious and amazing man named Kurtz. It's based on Conrad's own experiences traveling the wilds, and in many ways it's in kind of an exploration of anarchy and how that can get into a person. Not gonna lie, for the most of its run it was a pretty damn dull book, but by the end, the emotion from the writer really started to get to me, and it's one of the most compelling books that I've read in quite a while. I really got the feeling that the author was trying to reach out to me. It was dark and dreary, but I got the impression that Conrad, the author, wanted to be proven wrong, that life is fair and okay and fine after all, even though he doesn't see it that way. And after I read it, everything fell silent for me. Even my normally very kinetic mind had little to say, except to recall this piece of music, from the TV show Dexter. After some thought, I decided that I was a fan of the book, and was actually very excited to see what a film, or video game, in this case, adaptation could do with it. Apocalypse Now transitioned the story to a Vietnam setting, and it had some really great moments and some beautiful cinematography, but I often felt like it was missing the point. Like, the part where they take a break from the slow descent into madness to have political talks over a fine dinner with some French colonists that got turned down from the Godfather editions and have no impact on the story whatsoever, which was cut out of the original film but added back on a re-release for some goddamn reason. One of the film's biggest missteps was the casting of Marlon Brando as Kurtz. A character who was supposed to be unreal in his charisma and talent, played by a man that is physically capable of looking interested in anything he does. Great choice. And that's not even accounting the fact that he showed up far too fat for the role, so the cinematographer had to shoot him from really awkward angles to make him look thinner, resulting in the most awful camera work in the entire film. But the worst crime is that the return home, the very end of the book, the best and only good part of that book, was cut out of the movie completely and replaced with a non-ending that will have you asking important questions like, what the hell was the point of that? Apocalypse Now is kind of like the Cloud Atlas film adaptation. It's a complete mess, but it's a very well put together mess, if that makes any sense. I'm not gonna lie, I was very uncertain about Spec Ops going in, but I gave it the benefit of the doubt, and promptly had my mind blown. I liked it so much that I made a flowchart of all possible artist interpretations and played it again all the way through in one sitting the following weekend. But this is about the point in the review where I have to actually tell you what the game is about, or more precisely, let Marlowe, or in this case Captain Walker, tell you.
Is John Conrad the greatest man I ever served with? Well, I don't know. There was this one time in Kabul when he dragged my bleeding carcass half a mile to an evac chopper. So maybe I'm biased. But the facts don't lie. The man's a fucking hero. Remember when the first storms hit Dubai? You're probably all safe and sound at home watching TV. Well, Conrad was leading the damn 33rd out of Afghanistan. Instead of coming home, he volunteered his entire battalion to help with the evac. But all you did was send a check. Rumor is Conrad was ordered to abandon the city. He defied that order, and the 33rd stood with him. Now, the official story's still hazy about what happened next. All we know for sure is that the storms got worse. Much worse. Last thing we heard out of Dubai was that Conrad was leading a caravan of survivors out of the city. That was 6 months ago. Then, 2 weeks ago, we picked up this transmission.
This is Colonel John Conrad, United States Army. The evacuation of Dubai ended in complete failure. Death toll, too many.
The game begins with Walker, aided by a smart-ass sniper and a black guy, entering the ruins of Dubai to find the damned 33rd trying to keep everyone in line, with violence if necessary, and a desperate group of rebels rejecting the 33rd's self-given authority. Neither side is in the clear moral right, and both mistake Walker's team for a member of the opposing force, and thus the game begins. As many have pointed out, it starts out purposefully average. You were an all-American hero shooting foreigners and saving the innocents. Typical stuff, but deceptively simple. The game then begins to slowly change details. The foreigners are replaced by American soldiers, but hey, the game justifies. These guys are rogue, and you're just defending the innocent. There's nothing wrong with this. And so on. The game goes on like this, changing things about what your goal is, seeing how long they can go before you notice that something is terribly wrong, until you have to look back and wonder how the hell this got so messed up. The game is about Walker and his men trying to be all-American heroes, and the game showing how ridiculous that actually is, as the plot and characters go from total cliches to something else entirely. This game is an attack on modern shooters, but not just from one angle. It attacks them from the inside, criticizing every single, even minute part of the modern shooter, from the xenophobic tendencies to the dehumanization and glorification of war crimes, to the throwaway justifications these games give you. The point isn't that violence in video games is hurting the children, the point is that everything else is. The game's greatest achievement is its criticism of the power fantasy, or the hero fantasy as Extra Credits calls it. Almost all video games are about an artificial sense of self-worth, that we are the great saviors of the land, the only ones who can stop the aliens or the terrorists or the dragons. And Spec Ops is here to tell us how pathetic we are for thriving off of that. That we need a game or film or Marine recruitment ad to tell us how special we are, to get them to give us our money, or in the case of the military, our lives, just so we can hear it. The game doesn't actually criticize the military, I just think that the criticisms still apply because I'm an unpatriotic bastard. All the praise for the game's message, the actual story often gets overlooked, which is a tragedy because the game is a great war story in its own right. It's not so much based on Heart of Darkness as it is inspired by Heart of Darkness. The tone and message are totally different, but the similarities and homages to both Heart of Darkness and Apocalypse Now are appreciated, speaking as a fan. The best part about the story is that it's always messing with your head. The game has symbolism and metaphor, and parts of the story aren't real, and there are 3 or so different ways to interpret the game's plot, give or take some overlap. And don't forget about that part right there, because I will be talking about that again. The actual gameplay is the oft-agreed-upon weakness in Spec Ops: The Line, being a very run-of-the-mill and fairly outdated shooter. But I would counter that by saying that the varied environments, use of music, squad commands, and story context make it serviceable if not particularly thrilling. Although getting mowed down in less than a second while fidgeting with the cover system doesn't help the pacing any, that's why I recommend playing on easy. The best part of the entire game is the ending, which I would go so far as to call one of the best bits of interactive storytelling in years, maybe even ever. It reminds me of Deus Ex Human Revolution, where you get 4 endings that are not impacted by any previous choices in the game. But in this case, the endings are hidden behind artist interpretation metaphor and unforeseeable consequences, and then the game gives you 5 seconds to pick one before it chooses for you. This forces the player to act on their first instincts, giving them a clue to their own psychology, and which interpretation of the plot they like best. Speaking of interpretation, that plays into the endings too. As I said before, there are 3 basic ways to interpret the game's story, and these change what the metaphor at the end means, radically changing the meaning of the endings themselves. So, between 4 endings and 3 interpretations, resulting in radically different endings, there are actually more like 12 conclusions to the story. The real punchline is that all of these offer fitting, and with maybe a few exceptions, satisfying conclusions to the story arc, and that to me is mind-blowing. The real question here about the game is, did it move me? This is harder to answer than you might think. You see, my mind runs almost exclusively on logic, even if my body shows signs of emotions. I cry or fall silent, often with no impairment to my higher brain function. The game's impact can still be measured by its physical effect on me, however, even though I'm not this game's target audience. I take little joy from power fantasies and don't like military shooters very much, therefore the guilting doesn't work nearly as well. I will, however, say that I still felt a tightness of the throat and sickness of the stomach when playing the darker scenes, and I've never played a game before that could do that to me. If that isn't good enough for you, then this is. My take on this game is that there is no way to properly play Spec Ops: The Line without it adding something to your life, and you can quote me on that.